Cool. So this is part one of the ES6 study group series, and what I'm going to focus on for this particular topic is arrow functions and block scope using let and const keywords. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to create a directory here, call it ES61, cd ES61. Let's get that open in the Atom. Cool. All right, so I'm also going to do, let's see, create a file called arrow.js. Cool, so let's compare what an arrow function looks like compared to a normal function declaration. So assume you have normal function bar AB, takes in a couple of arguments. We're going to log A and B into the console. Cool. So this is a normal function declaration. You've got the keyword function, followed by the name of the function, any of the parameters you want to define, and then you've got the curly braces with the body of that function. So you've got the function signature up here, the body of the function inside the curly braces, and then the call bar, you would just execute it and pass in the arguments you want to pass in, 1 and 2. So then it's going to log 1 and 2 to the console. Cool. So let's see what an arrow function looks like. So with an arrow function, they are primarily anonymous functions, so you have to set it equal to a variable if you want to define it that way. And it consists of the parameter list surrounded by two parens. So, assuming you have more than one parameter, you need to surround both of those by a pair of parentheses. And then it's followed by a fat arrow. And then it's followed by curly braces that contain the function body. So inside there, you would also do the same thing of console.logging A and B. So then I'm going to rename this bar to foo. And then you would call foo 3, 4. Cool. So now you have 1, 2, which is the execution of the regular function declaration. And then you have 3 and 4 locked to the console, which is a result of calling foo, which is an arrow function. So that's essentially how an arrow function is structured. Now you can define different ways of an arrow function, or sorry, you can define an arrow function in a number of different ways, is the best way to explain that there. You only need these set of curly braces if you have more than one expression you're executing inside the body of the function. If you're only doing one thing, then you don't need curly braces at all. For example, so this will execute the same as if we had the curly braces. So again, if you only have one expression in the function body, you don't need any braces at all, curly braces at all. If you need your arrow function to return something, then you need the curly braces and the return keyword. So let's say return A plus B. If this was an add function or method. Let's log that to the console. We get 7 right there, which is adding A and B and returning that value. I'm logging that return value to the console, which is why we get 7. And again, if you just have one expression, then we can remove the keyword and JavaScript will implicitly return that evaluated expression. So let's log that to the console and let's pass in 5 and 6. And we see 11 down there. Cool. So yeah, again, no expression, just one expression. You don't need the curly braces. Multiple expressions inside the function body, then you need the curly braces. So let's see. So let's declare a function called operations, or let's do a number of things to the values that get passed into operations. So first I'm going to declare a variable var c equals a times 2, so I'm going to double 2, and then var d equals b times 3. Now I want to return c plus d. So let's take a look and see what happens. I called add, it should be operations. Cool, we get 28. Awesome. Cool. So let's take a look, see here. I'm going to comment this out for now. So one thing to note about arrow functions is they're always function expressions. There is no way to use a function declaration for an arrow function. For example, we couldn't do something like that. JavaScript will yell at you. Yeah. So they need to be set up as a function expression. Cool. Also, they're anonymous function expressions. So even if you wanted to do var operations equals stuff, again, JavaScript will yell at you. So they need to be anonymous function expressions in order to work. So a common use for arrow functions is as a callback function for various utility methods. So let's take a look at map, for example. So map you normally call on an array. 5. So you would call a.map. And that takes in a callback function where we declare the individual value getting passed in. And what we can do is, let's say we want to double each value and collect it in a new array. So we do times 2. And we'd return that. Var new array equals that. If we were to console.log new array, we can see 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, which is again a doubling of the individual values inside the A array. But here we needed to use an actual function, anonymous function, as our callback. If we wanted to convert that to use an arrow function, what we would do, for now I'm going to comment this out, new array, a.map, and then again, because we just have one argument, we don't need to wrap it in parentheses, and we do the fat arrow, and then because we're doing just one expression, we don't need any curly braces or the return keyword. So this replaces all of this code here. And if we console.log new array again, we get the same result. Cool. So another feature that arrow functions provide is the binding of the this keyword. So what do I mean by that? So let's say that we had an object called controller, and that object had a key called bind listener, which has a value of a function. So inside this particular function, we want to take a button, and I haven't created that button yet. Element by ID, and let's call that button BTN. We want to add an event listener. It's going to be a click event listener. That also takes a callback function as its second argument. And let's console.log this here. Let's send request. Awesome. Second method that we're going to have for this controller is the send request. Console.log sending the request. Awesome. So now what we need to do is create that file. All right. Then we need a button with an ID of BTN. Click me. Awesome. Let's also add the script tag. Source equals arrow.js. Awesome. So now let's open up a browser and paste. Cool. Awesome. So now we've got the JavaScript loaded in the file. We pulled this particular button, saved it in a local variable, and added the event listener of click, where we're going to log this to the console, and we're going to attempt to call this .send request, because the idea is this should be the controller. So when we call this .send request, it should be this send request function that's attached to this controller object. So let's click and see what happens. We get nothing. Let's make sure. Oh, I know what I need to do. I need to call that method. I need to bind the listener. Awesome. There we go. Cool. Just needed, couldn't do a self-closing script tag. I forgot about that. Awesome. So yeah, if we try to click on click me, looks like we get an error. This.sendRequest is not a function. And when we log this to the console, it's the actual button. It's not the controller. So when we click on a button, the this inside that event handler is the element that gets interacted with according to the event listener. So there are a couple of ways that we can hack this. What we would normally have to do is in our bind listener, we'd have to create a reference to the controller. So var self equals this, and then inside the event listener, we'd have to call self.sendRequest. That way, when we call self.sendRequest, we're referencing controller, so then it's going to be calling controller.sendRequest. See, sending the request. So now this function got fired because we made a reference to the controller prior to the event listener making self equal to this. So let's try this with an arrow function now as our event listener. So instead of this callback function, we declare an arrow function. So essentially pretty much the same thing. Inside here we can do making the request. And then now we can do this.send request, because using an arrow function we're going to bind the this keyword to the actual object rather than the event listener. There we go. Sending the request. If we were to log this to the console, instead of the button, we'd get the object, which is the controller object that has the methods bind listener and send request attached to it. So that's what the this key, or what the arrow function allows us to do. It allows us to bind the this that's in context. Cool. So let's take a look now. Awesome. So that's arrow functions in a nutshell. Again, once you get used to the syntax, they start to become a little easier to work with. So let's go on to block scoping. So one of the basic strategies of variable scoping has always been the utilization of a function. If you needed to create a block of scope, you would declare a function or some sort of immediately invoked function expression. So, for example, what do I mean by that? Let's touch block.js. So let's say out of our x equals 2, function my function, var x equals 3, function scope, string interpolation, and then we'll call my function, and then under that we'll log global scope. Cool. So let's node block.js. So we can say, or we can see here inside my function scope, x is equal to 3. Whereas in the global scope, my x is equal to 2. So this is a way, again, we can create scoped variables is by creating these functions to make sure that certain variables are only scoped to those particular functions. But in ES6 now, we can declare variables that are bound to any block, not just a function scope, using the let keyword. So what does that mean? So let's remove this function here. And let's say that we wanted to create a block. And then this is how we create a block in JavaScript. What we can do is say let x equals 3. And then we'll, inside block scope, now let's run my function. Don't need to call that anymore, actually. Cool. So now we've got this block here that's defining a variable x using the let keyword. And inside this block scope, x is still equal to 3. But let's say that we use the var keyword here. Let's see what happens. So we can see here that we declare a variable x, set it equal to 2. We enter this block. We declare this variable x and set it equal to 3. We log inside block scope. We log that value, which is 3. But then here in the global, we can see here that x was reset to 3. Because again, using the var keyword, we don't have blocked variables or block scope variables. This var x will push this variable declaration outside of the scope of the block. That's why when we logged the global scope x, we still got 3 instead of 2. So again, using the let keyword allows us to declare block scoped variables. Cool. So now let's take a look at another example. So if true, let x equal 4, console.log x. Cool. So if true, so this is going to evaluate to true, x is going to equal to 4. We're going to console.log x, and again, this creates a block, and this let creates this variable x that's scoped to just this block. And then I'm going to keep this var x2 and then log x to the global scope. Actually, let's do this. Awesome. So inside if block, console.log, x is equal to 4, and then global scope, x is equal to 2. Let's change this to var again. And we can see here, inside if block is still equal to 4, but then our global has been reset to 4 as well, because it replaced this declaration of x equal 2 in the global scope. So, cool. So that's essentially it for arrow functions and using block scope with the let and var keyword. And actually const is the same thing as let. Actually, let me go over const real quickly. So const uses the same block scoping as let. The only difference is with const, you can't reset the value of that variable. So const x equals 4. And if we were to try to reset the value to 5, we can see here assignment to a constant variable. So we can't reset the value. If this were a let, there'd be no issues there. So that's the main difference. With const, however, you can't reassign the value of the variable, but however, if the value or if the variable you declare is an object type where you can modify the properties of that object, then that's doable. So let's say that the const variable was an array. You can do arr.push 5 and pop but you can't say arr equals you're going to get that same error of assignment to a constant variable. Cool. Let's say it was an object.